Okay, good morning, ladies and gents. Hopefully you are now able to hear and see everything that I am doing. We're going to get started straight away because I want to try and keep this as short and concise as possible. I can see a few people had posted questions either via email or via the chat system. I want to address those shortly. First things first, if you remember that the content for your programming project, specifically for nines, for tens and elevens, you'll be familiar with this page as obviously we use it quite often. You want to be on the OCR website, computer science, the J276 qualification for tens and elevens, and you want to be under assessment, and you want to be under programming project, and you want to look for programming project tasks June 2020 to 2021. Okay, so this is the document that obviously that we have been working from, that I want you to focus on outside of lessons between, so that when you come in you are presented for these. So we're not going to go through all the ins and outs of these, but to give you a rough understanding of the sorts of content that the assignment is requesting from you. So you can see here that we need to be able to randomly select song, name, and artist from a given list. We need the artist and the first letter of each word in the song title to be displayed. We need the user to have 2 chances to guess the song name, and if the user guesses the answer correctly the first time, they score 3 points, and the second time they score 1 point. The game ends when a player guesses the number of songs incorrectly the second time. So essentially they get 2 choices. Authorization, it's talking about usernames and passwords here. So we want to make sure that we have some form of authentication. And obviously validation. So this is where we have the difference between verification and validation. So validation being if information is valid for a specific topic. So for example, the first of the first 1990 is a valid date of birth, but if we can't verify that without additional information, for example, seeing somebody's ID or their driving license to know if that date really is their date of birth. So valid means that it's true to meet a certain criteria. Verified, which is what we're going to be doing with authorization, means that it's correct, it's actual, it's true to fact. So authorization for players would be the username and password being verified to an external file in most cases. Okay, so we won't go into the ins and outs of everything for this assignment, but obviously what you can see here is the specifics of what it is this one would require. So task 2 is asking players to roll a pair of dice. The points are rolled on each player's dice are added to their score, so it's cumulative of the 2 dice. If the total is an even number, they get an additional 10 points on top of the score that they got. So if they got 2 6s, they'll get their score of 12, but then they'll get an additional 10 points because the total's an even number. If the total's an odd number, they get then 5 points are subtracted from their score. So if they get a 2 and a 1, so they get 3. 3's added to their score, but then 5 is removed as a punishment for it being an odd number, so to speak. If they roll a double, so this comes back to our initial example where they got 2 6s, so they got 12. That means that they then got 10 points. But they then get to roll an extra die, so a single, and the number of points is then added again to that cumulative point. So at no point can the player's score go below 0, so we obviously need to be validating that. And basically the player with the highest score at the end of 5 rounds wins the game. Okay. If the players have the same score at the end of each round, at the end of the 5 rounds, I should say, they each roll 1 more single die, and whoever gets the highest score wins. And this carries on until, so this will be a while. So this carries on until somebody actually gets a high score. for example, if they were both rolling the same dice every time, it would keep going until one of them got a higher number. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through the specifics of what each of these entails. And then task 3, so it says Louise creating a card game. The game uses a deck of cards, and there are 30 cards in the deck. Each card has one color, red, black, or yellow, and each card has a number, 1 to 10, for each of those colors. Each card is unique. So the 30 cards are shuffled and stored in the deck. So the rules then basically say that player 1 takes the top card from the deck, player 2 takes the next card. If both players have a card of the same color, so one of the original 3 colors, the player with the highest number then wins. If both players have different colors, the winning color is shown in the table. So basically, essentially, this is the order that we would want things to be in. So if we got a red and a black, the red's a winner. If we've got a yellow and red, the yellow's a winner, and a black. So it's arbitrary, but that's the information we've been given. The winner of each round keeps both cards. So obviously they are then need to be removed from your cumulative or from your list of cards. The players keep playing until there are no cards left in the deck. So they basically just go through the whole deck, through all 30. Again, authorized players. So we're going to verify them from a external file. And again, input needs to be validated, so somebody can't put in an age, for example, or a generic integer in a string field for a username. All right. So that's the basics of those. Okay. So pretty much everything that we have covered in terms of Python is enough for you to be able to do any of these 3 that you would want to choose. So obviously you're only doing 1 out of the 3. Again, this is the 10s and 11s. So what I've got here is I've got a copy of curriculum resources from the school network, computer science, Python examples. So these are examples that you can use, but you have to reference to the fact that if you have used these to influence you, that you've used something that I've provided with you. None of these are direct copy and pastes, for example. You can't just copy and paste this in and expect it to work. But there are some things in here that you might decide that you want to use or that you need to. I'm going to tackle one question which was asked, just because it's very, very straightforward, about date and time. So if we have a little look at date and time. So date time is a library that is already built in to Python, which we are more than entitled to use. We don't have to create subroutines and everything from scratch. So it's as simple as that. From date and time, we're importing from within inside that subroutine. And then if I zoom in a little bit, you might be able to see this slightly better. So hopefully you can read that. And then you can then print, obviously, the content from within that. So in this case, we're going to, from date and time, we're going to print date, and we are going to print time. I've just done it on 2 separate lines to make it easier, and so you can see the syntax. And basically, if we run that, what you will get then from my 2 lines, let's put that over there, here, so you can see this. So we then get, in our first line, because of the format that we've used, we get today's date, and then we obviously get today's time. Now we can obviously customize this to be the way that we want. It's currently showing at 12:18:57, which is the time, obviously, that I hit the button. But we can obviously minimize that down and remove the additional integers after the point if that's the case. All right. So hopefully that explains date and time. Depending on what it is you want to use that for, obviously we may need to tweak that further. But that's the way that works. So how does validation work and help you code when you put it in your code? Right. So validation. So there are different ways to validate information, and the simple way that it works is if somebody puts in an entry, you need to compare it to something, because the computer can't tell you whether it's valid or not, other than its data type. So data types, we're talking about integers, strings, booleans, that sort of thing. So it can tell you straight away whether an integer or a string meets the data type. But anything more than that, you need to be specific. So it doesn't know, for example, January, February, March, April, May. It doesn't know what the months are in that respect. So you would need to define those in a list, for example. So let's see. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head now where I might where there might be an example of validation. So let's start with something. Okay, so this is a very simple. Example of validation. So remember, validation is just the general term that we use for for checking if something's correct. We can apply it in all sorts of different ways. So rather than me just talk here, if you can see this in front of you, and just feel free to type into the chat here, what validation do you think is happening in this if statement? And I'll give you a couple of seconds. Feel free to type into the chat and we'll see if anybody gets it right. I'll give it a minute or two. If not, I'll explain it. Apologies, that's my glass. Similarly, I did explain also that if for things like this with answers and so on, you can email me. I've got my emails open as well. So if you would rather post a question or an answer that's not in front, you could, in front of other people, you can obviously email me that way. So the main principle of this, okay? So the main principle is, now this is kind of superfluous because by default, any input that you use will be treated as a string unless you specify a different data type here. So here, if I was to put integer, then it would treat the input as an integer, as a number, a whole number, or rather than a decimal. So there isn't really a need for string here, but just for the argument's sake. So it's asked you to enter a letter. So this is where now it's now validating and handling an error if not. So if the person, when the user runs it, if they enter a capital A or a capital B, these are the two statements that will then be triggered. Yeah, good. Sorry, I was jumped the gun a little bit there. I can see somebody's just posted the correct answer. Yeah, well done. So if they type in A or B, that is what will those are the ones that will be triggered. Anything else, it'll trigger this statement here. You didn't enter a letter. So this here, any guesses as to what that does? So I'll come back to your question about about how could it be used for a username and password. We will come back to that in a second. But yes, essentially that's exactly what it does. So I got a response there via email. So no matter what the user types in, it will convert it to an uppercase letter. So if they type in a lowercase a, it will be handled and it will be converted to uppercase so that it can validate here. Because remember, Python will treat those as different, well, because they are different, it will treat them as different strings, a lowercase a. So if you put in a lowercase a without this, okay, it won't trigger this first part of the if statement because it's looking for an uppercase a. Same with a lowercase b. So if they put in a lowercase a, it will get converted to an uppercase. If they put in an uppercase a, it will just stay as an uppercase. Yeah, excellent. So that's essentially validation. And then obviously just to kind of prove the point here. So it's asking us to enter a letter. So to prove the point, I'm going to enter a lowercase a. Okay. Now we know it's going to be handled because of that dot upper. And again, to prove the point here. So remember, we can use the hash symbol to either to remove pieces of code that we don't want or to write comments. So again, if I run it again, so having seen that entering a lowercase a there triggered you've entered an A, if I enter a lowercase a again now, this time it says you didn't enter a letter, okay? Because of that handling of the uppercase and lowercase characters. All right, so that's that. Now, in terms of using this for a username and password, it's not ideal. And what is the reason that it's not ideal to validate your username and passwords inside of your code like this? What is the issue that you are going to face. So if you were to use this to validate username and password, and you were to put your username here, so whatever the username is meant to be in the password. So for example, obviously this is, we're gonna, let's say we were to hash this out and we were to say, yeah, so obviously somebody has already worked this out, and that's exactly the issue. So we have to come up with a different solution, because if I do this and I say username equals GA student1, and I say password equals golding10, it means obviously we won't bother doing the print line, so you get the idea. If we were to do it this way, and then say you didn't enter a valid username and password, you can see the content right here. So it means anybody that edits the code and so forth in the future can see that content. So security wise, you've got a bit of a problem. Okay, so it's not ideal to do that. It would mean that obviously anybody who was to breach security and gain unauthorized access to the system would be able to see those usernames and passwords in plain text. So we have a different solution. So we're actually going to jump quite a lot here in terms of complexity, but I'm going to answer it because obviously that's the whole point of this. So this is all about reading and writing to a file. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this on my desktop, I think, just to so we can see this. All right, so I'm going to use the one from Curriculum Resources though as a basis. Okay, and we're going to have a little look at this. So this is where things obviously get a bit more complex now. So we're creating a new variable here called myFile. Remember, it's just a variable. It could be anything else. Okay, in this case, I am going to, and we'll just do it as a text file again, just for ease of, but it could be an encrypted file, it could be a CSV, it could be anything. So I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it user verification. Okay, so I'm going to call it user verification, and I'm actually just going to write the same thing that we did last time, which is, let's call it GA user 1, and on the second line we're going to write golding 10. Okay, so I'm actually going to get rid of this line. So for the time being, let's just pretend this is our this is what we are going to do. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So if we move up to here, so you can actually see this. So I've now got a, and actually I'm going to just, for clarity, just rename this user. Okay, so I've got a Python file called usernames passwords. I'll put this over here, and this is what's going to happen. So it's now going to create a text file called userverification.txt. We're opening it in write mode to allow us to be able to create to it. Okay. Good spot. So we're going to come to that, but seeing as you've mentioned it, we might as well tackle it now rather than later. So we do have a bit of an issue because writing to files like this is going to put this information on the same line if we don't handle that. I was going to just run it and let you see it, but you spoiled my surprise, so we'll go for it. So I can see obviously a little bit of a discussion as well between /n and \n. So let's go with the first suggestion then, that we put a /n at the end of this line here, and we will see what happens. So I'm going to hit F5 and I'm going to run this, and we're going to see what happens. So you will see that the code has run without error, but there is no output because there is no output to this. What has happened, however, though, is that, now I might need to zoom out to see where it's put this. Oh, it's over here. It has created a text file called user verification, which is what we called it. If we open that, you will see that it is now created a line of text called GA user 1 and golden to n. Now, you obviously picked up on the fact that it's not a /n. So let's do a \n and try it again. So notice now I've just run it again, because we opened it in write mode, what that means is it's going to overwrite all of the content that was in there. So we're not going to see the old text in there now. It's just overwritten it with brand new text. Oops. It's just overwritten it with brand new text. So it doesn't, you've got to be really careful when using W, because it will overwrite whatever's already in that file. And if it's important, it's gone. Okay. So, yeah. So I'll prove that point again. So we've got GA user 1 Goldington. Okay. So I'm going to close that. And I'm just going to change it to user 1 to prove the point here. So we hit run. We go back to our text file. You will see that, sorry, it's auto. It's gotten rid of GA user 1 and overwritten it with this. So just be careful. You can use an A instead of a W, as you can see from here, and it will add it. It will append it to the bottom of the file. Okay, but now we've got a username and password on 2 separate lines. Okay, and this way, the advantage to this is that we now can't see. When we call it in a second, we won't be able to see the actual username and password. So when I say call it, let's see what I mean by that. So let's close some of these down. So we're going to go back to Python examples, and this time we're going to go reading from a file. So I'm going to copy that out. So let's say user checking. Okay, so now we've got some options to look at. Okay, this was obviously using the old subjects one, which had subjects in it, but the principle is still exactly the same. So this time we're not going to open subjects. We're going to open user verification. And again, you will see that we are opening it in read mode, not in write mode. So this time it will not overwrite the content that is in there. Okay. The way that this works is that in option one, a new variable, although we've reused the variable from the old Python file, it doesn't matter because obviously it's in a completely separate file now. We are opening user verification text in read mode. We are reading that content, the whole file, into and let's just call this let's call it users. We are reading that entire text file into a variable called users. We are closing it, and then we are printing the variable users. You cannot print a text file directly, so you can't just click print user verification.txt. It doesn't work like that. You've got to put it into a variable and then print that variable. Okay, so we're going to ignore this for the time being. So ignore what comes up after this, but let's just run this now so we can see it. And let's see what I did wrong here. Let's have a look at something. Oh, actually, you can probably work this out rather than. So let me put the error message up on screen. So what is the issue? Yes. So I can see here that obviously for some reason, it flagged the first one of those messages in chat. But yes, you've all figured this out, because obviously, although we are just concerned with this first block of text, it's running the whole thing as a whole, and there's no .txt here, which is why it's nothing with this code up here. So let's run that again. Okay, so Ignore the second Goldington, that's being done by this code down here. But the top two, you will see it's now printed out user1 and Goldington from that user verifications text file. And notice you can't see the username and password, so it's now hidden even from the coder. So you're handling that data without actually ever seeing it. Okay. However, you may not want to print the entire thing. You may just want to print the password, for example. So this is where option 2 from reading a file comes in. So this time, now I'm going to get rid of this because it's not really relevant. So to just to make it clear, just to separate them out when it comes to the output. So so this one here, this is the one being generated by this block of text. So we're opening it in read mode again, just like we did last time, except this time we're taking the first line by using this command read line. We are taking the first line and we are putting it into a variable called first line, and we are stripping the \n from it. Okay, we are taking the second line, and on this occasion there is no \n, so this isn't doing anything. But we would be stripping the \n from it as well. We're closing it, and then we are able to print either the first or second line. So for example, this time, if I change that to first now, run it again, it will now print username and Goldington because of that first block of code, but then it will just print user1. So we can choose whether we want the usernames or the passwords, because of, for example, in this case, your usernames would all end up on the odd lines 1, 3, 5, etc., and the passwords would end up on the even lines 2, 4, 6, and you could write those into a list, and obviously they would match up then. Okay, so that's the way that we can handle those. Okay, and it will then allow us to do verification without actually being able to see the text, the plain text. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly check what other requests there were. Okay, so fine, so that's that. I'll get rid of those. Let's go back to our curriculum resources. So let's have a look then. So in order to answer this one, let's have a look at this, because this is one that often catches students in terms of how we pass variables. So okay, so again, we're importing another library here, random. Random allows us to randomly generate a number between a given range, and we're initializing a variable called score to 0. Okay, we are now defining a subroutine. Okay, and we are defining a subroutine called game, and we are sending it a variable here. Okay, so once we have something in these brackets, we are creating a new variable called gameTurn, and it is then going to be whatever has been sent to the variable plus a random integer between 1 and 10. So something gets sent to this, so let's say it's a value, let's say 5, and then 5 is then added to another integer of a random value between 1 and 10, and then this variable that we created here is then being returned. So let me explain about the returning, because we see lots of people just creating these global variables. So what's the difference between a local and a global variable when it comes to subroutines? What is the difference? And I'll give you a couple of seconds to type this. Good. So a couple of people on the right lines. Let me just check. I see someone's emailed. Let's have a look. Okay, so hence the reason why we're going through this, I guess. So the way that it works, okay, if you make a variable, so in this case, game turn, if you make a new variable inside of the subroutine, only other Python code that is inside of the subroutine can access this variable. Okay, excellent, good answers. So if I then try to use game turn here, for example, it's going to say that game turn is not defined because it can't actually see. Think of it as only being visible inside of the subroutine. So we can make a global variable. That means then that the variable can be used inside and outside, but it's not great practice to just make all these variables global. And in lesson time, we can have a look at the downside to doing so, because this is currently a local variable. Okay, one second. This is currently a local variable, but by returning it, we are then being able to return the output of this back to whatever has called it. Okay, so in this case, let's have a little look at this. So we've got player 1 turn 1, player 2 turn 1, player 1 turn 2, player 2 turn 2. And what that is going to be is you are going to, we are calling the game subroutine and we are sending it the score of 0. Okay, currently at this stage, because there is no score currently. However, the subroutine called game is waiting for the variable turn, isn't it? So is there going to be an error here because of that or not? So we are calling the game subroutine, so that's okay. You call it literally, so calling it means to make it run just by using the word. However, we are sending it the variable score, which was up here. So except this game subroutine is expecting the variable turn. So is there going to be a problem here or not? Is it going to work? Because each time we've sent it score, but the game subroutine is expecting the variable turn. So is that going to cause a problem or not? What do we think? So again, I'll give you a couple of seconds to have a think about that. Okay. So the answer to that question is no, it's not going to cause an issue because they don't have to be the same variable, okay? This is just a placeholder. So we're sending it the variable score, and it's basically then going to use it as a variable called turn. So it doesn't actually matter that they're different. That's how subroutines work. So score will then be inserted into the variable turn, so to speak. And so it'll be able to use it just as is. So you don't actually have to use the same word. Okay. So the first time round, score is going to be equal 0. It's then going to be added to a random value of 1 to 10, and then it's going to be returned. Okay, which is then how it allows the this print line to then work, because it's then had a value returned to it. Otherwise, if we didn't return it, that variable is only going to be accessible with inside it, and so we're not going to get anything. We're not going to get anything here. So the second time round, score is 0 still, because obviously it's still 0. So this variable of score hasn't changed, and we're going to add to it a random number, and we're going to return it the same thing again and again. Okay, so arguably, this example, we're not really, this is more of a proofing concept. You're not really achieving anything by adding 0 to a random number. You could just randomly generate a number each time. But I'm just trying to show the concept here. So we could make that a number. Or we could increment score. So after each one, we could do score equals score plus 1, for example. And the number will change each time, making your scores go up and up and up. So there are lots of variations. This is not a this is how you need to do this for this part of the project. This is a proof in concept that you could use. So again, if we run this, you will see now it's basically randomly generating scores. And the advantage of this is because of what we've done here, you can actually see what random numbers were generated each time. So the first time a 1 was generated, because obviously it was just added to 0, so it must have been a 1. The second time was a 4, the second time was a 7, and then it happened to randomly generate a 1 again, because again, it is a random generation. Okay, so that is how we pass variables back and forth between them. Okay, between a subroutine and then outside of that subroutine. And obviously you might have multiple subroutines at the same time. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a very short break, and we will then come back to this. Okay. So just a 5-minute break or so, and then we will come back to this. All right. So I will see you very shortly. Okay, so we're just going to finish off because, again, I am conscious of time and obviously how much time we've spent on this so far. So we're just going to finish off with a final example of subroutines, seeing as that is what we were covering. All right. So I'm actually going to run this and then we're going to talk through it. All right. So if I run this now. Oh, apparently not. So let's see what it doesn't like about that. Sorry, it's my fault. I must have hit that on the keyboard. Let's try that again. Hold on 1 second. Let's have a look at something. Oh, I think this is actually an older version. So actually, that's error is going to repeat all the way through. So again, this is obviously probably quite a good opportunity to discuss this. So this is actually a snippet from a year 8 piece of Python that they were writing. And as you can see, something that has caught out lots of people is this opening and closing and terminating of brackets, which is why you can see it has been forgotten all the way through here. But I thought it was a nice piece of code, and it's nice to have something to look at that was written by a student rather than myself. Let's see what else we've got. Oh yeah, there's another one here. So the thing you've also got to remember is Python 3 point whatever onwards is stricter about this, as you can see, than other versions. So you've got to be really, really careful with your brackets, opening and closing. If you've opened 2, you close 2. If you open 3, you close 3. That was the only issue there. Okay. What this is asking, so I'm going to zoom in here so you can see this. What this is asking is, do you want to convert from Great British pounds, US dollars, or euros? Okay, and it's asking for a number 1, 2, or 3. Again, it's not the prettiest of interfaces, but you'll get the general idea. So let's say I'm going to convert from Great British pounds, and it says then it reacts based upon the fact I've put in Great British pounds. So it then doesn't show me Great British pounds because clearly I don't want to convert from Great British pounds to Great British pounds. So I've chosen one, so it then allows me to do to the other. So for example, if I then say I want to do it to US dollars, it then says how much do I want to convert. Okay, so let's start with a whole number because obviously we haven't tested any of this yet. So let's see what her code does so far. So let's say I want to do 150 pounds. Okay, so it says 150 pounds, your currency in US dollars is 186. Now it appears to be dealing with real numbers, okay, not just whole integers. So you can tell by the fact that the float has been carried here. So if I run this again now, and this time, let's say we choose a different one this time. So let's say US dollars. So this time it gives me Great British pounds or euros. So let's say euros. And this time I'm going to do 423.57. And it tells me, rounded down to 2 decimal places, that's going to be 398 and 16. Okay. So, a nice little bit of code here that's been written. Okay, missed the brackets, but other than that, very, very good. So let's have a little look at what has been done, because it'll take us a few minutes to go through this, and then we'll leave it there for today. So again, we have got these subroutines, okay? Defined, no global variables, okay? Each time we are returning the answer to the subroutine. So I don't want to see just a load of global variables that are just defined at the top of the page. Okay, we return the variables as and when we need them. So each time, what you can see here, so nice use of variable names here. So essentially what this is doing is Great British pounds to US dollars is going to be whatever the person entered times 1.24. So I'm pretty sure she just kind of had a look on Google and came up with some rough exchange rates. That's not really the point of what we need to do. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are, but you can see each time number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. We've got to create different variables here between these subroutines, and obviously you've got to give them different names. Names. So she's just added numbers to those. Okay. So depending on what permutation, she's handled all of them. Great British pounds to each of the others, and vice versa. Okay. So the first thing is she's asked for an input. It's an integer because we don't want floats here. It's an integer of converting one of the following, 1, 2, or 3. So this is what we looked at previously in the first part of the stream, where we're now doing a validation to check if the number is valid to the answer. So if the choice, again, be careful, notice here, double equals versus single equals. Single equals is when whatever is on the right goes into the variable and is stored in whatever's on the left. So single equals, whatever's on the right is stored in the variable on the left. Double equals is what we would refer to in maths. So 4 plus 4 equals 1. So whatever is on the left is equal to what is on the right. So this is what we've always known equals to be. In Python, we represent that as double equals. A single is actually going to try and put data into a variable. Okay, so this time, if the choice up here was a 1, then this is what she is asking it to do. Okay, so we then get another input. So if the choice is 1, we then get an input of convert to US dollars. So this is where she's handled it. That if we chose a 1 here, that means that we wanted Great British pounds. Therefore, we don't need to convert to Great British pounds because clearly we're not going from the same currency denomination to the same currency denomination. And then if that is the case, we then want to be able to do enter the desired amount. If that is the case, we are going from Great British pounds. If it's number 1 here, we are going to US dollars. So she is calling convert 1. And if we look at convert 1 is Great British pounds to US dollars. So this is the subroutine being called in that set of circumstances. However, if choice number 2 has been made, so US dollars, okay, we obviously then want to we want to take from Great British pounds from our choice here, from choice was equals 1, Great British pounds. However, choice number 2 was then made, which was euros. Sorry, not dollars. So it was euros. So we then want to call the second subroutine from the top. So when we've got convert to, we are going from Great British pounds to euros, and then it's returning that value. So essentially, and that's it. That's the same process then over and over and over again, handling each one of the different variations. Okay, so this is what we call a nested if statement, because we've got one if statement here and it's nested within a main primary choice. Then you can then actually reuse that code. Okay, and to be fair, some of this could also have been done in a subroutine. Any code that is being reused over and over, you want to use subroutines for it. So this is the final question of the day then. I'll let you kind of post either email or on the chat. Why would we want to use subroutines, so write something up here, for code that we use over and over and over, so that we keep just calling the subroutine rather than copying and pasting the same chunks of code over and over and over again? Why use a subroutine that we repeat, that we can repeat call? Why use a subroutine rather than copy and paste the code over and over? I'll give you a minute or two. Like I say, just post in the chat, or like I say, email me, that's fine. Why use subroutines rather than copying and pasting blocks of code like this over and over and over again? Perfect. Yeah, first answer is spot on. All of the things that the exam spec is looking for. So we know that it saves space. Now, this is a small program, but you got to remember that when programming first came about, computers and memory and the power that it took was really, really, really expensive, and actually it was really slow and cumbersome. So you didn't want to be duplicating lines of code, because that leads you on to the next point that you made, which is about obviously errors. We want to minimize the chances of errors. And the point is, once you've written a subroutine and you know it works, why not call it over and over and over again, rather than introduce the fact that you could include errors into it? Okay, so excellent. That's good. All right, and what it does mean, excellent point made there, that if you make a change here, it's then reflected all the way every time you've called it. If you copy and paste blocks of code over and over and over again, if you have to make a change, you then have to go through every single line of code and you have to make your change, just like I did with that brackets was a classic example. I had to then go through and fix every single bracket, because every time you've copied and pasted, the error has been copied and pasted along. So this one here, this print line that didn't have brackets, the error was copied and pasted every single time that we did it. Okay, and so that's the downside with not using subroutines and copying and pasting that code. And that's it. That's all this subroutine is. Okay, it's made up of two sections. It's made up of all this Python program is. It's made up of the subroutines at the top, and it's made up of a nested if statement and calling those subroutines to do those calculations rather than doing the calculations inside the if statement. Okay, I think that's where we're going to stop for the time being, because I kind of wanted to keep this at an hour or so. So what I would like is you to feel free to continue to post questions and scenarios and so forth. Email them to me, and I will. I'll then go back in and form the next topic next set of topics that we'll cover in the next live stream, and we can go from there. Okay. Thank you all, obviously, for joining today and taking part. This stream will obviously be saved automatically to Twitch and then will be uploaded to YouTube. Again, if you look at the advert on Twitch, you'll see the YouTube link that you need to go to. All right. Thank you very much, and I will see you all on Monday.